Earlier this year, Debian released a major upgrade of their operating system, Debian 13, aka Trixie. As well as updated applications with newer features, this brings a new kernel which should support newer firmware and offer better performance. Now, at the time of recording, the latest version is 13.1, which should have had plenty of testing from regular users. So, now is as good a time as ever to upgrade any Debian family of computers that are based on Debian 12. But how do you upgrade a computer from, say, Bookworm to Trixie? Well, if that's something that you're interested in finding out, then stick around and watch this video, as that's what we'll be going over. Now, I have to assume that your computer is running Debian 12, and that's because you can't upgrade from, say, Debian 11, aka Bullseye, to Debian 13. You would have to upgrade that to Debian 12 first. And because of the complexity, I'm also assuming you have a standard installation Debian. The release notes, for instance, mention that if you're doing app pinning, you need to disable that. But that's just one example of the things you have to look for. And as I can't know what non-standard changes you might have made, if any, I'll only cover standard Debian installations in this video. Now, before you actually start upgrading to Debian 13, do check out known issues first. So I've got a link here about issues that you need to be aware of for Trixie. Do read through these because, for example, i386 CPUs, so these are the older 32-bit processors, are just no longer supported. As they're saying here, realistically, if you've got a computer using an i386 CPU, then really you should be replacing the hardware and not upgrading from, say, Bookworm to Trixie. But do check all these out. There's quite a few of them. I mean, normally the process is pretty smooth. I haven't had any major issues doing any upgrades, but everybody's computer is typically different. So do check these just to be sure, because there's no point doing an upgrade if it turns out it's not going to work anyway. Having said that, there's also potential issues you could run into during the actual upgrade process, and I would suggest checking these out. Typically it should go quite smoothly, but have a read through these potential issues just so it gives you something to be prepared with, just in case something does actually go wrong. Now, when all is said and done, do make sure you've got a complete backup of your system, or at least the data itself, any configurations of applications, because you never know. Ideally, if you've got a lab, you could test your upgrades out in there first. Then if anything goes wrong, it doesn't affect a live computer. Another thing to be aware of, though, is the actual software that you're running. What this is actually covering is going to be Debian plus the actual software packages that Debian are providing in their own repositories for you. Now, they'll all get upgraded, but when you're talking about third-party software, that's something else you need to be factoring in. So to give you some perspective, I've got a computer which uses MySQL. Now, as I found out, that's not quite ready for Debian 13. It still works in Bookworm. The only trouble is they haven't made it available yet, or they haven't done what's necessary to get it to work in Debian 13. Now, there are some users who've found a way around that. They've somehow managed to get the Debian 12 version working in Debian 13, but I had too many problems because there's reliance on older software that's not available, for instance. So realistically for me, the choices would be, well, I could put that in a container until you actually provide a Debian 13 version, or I could switch to something like MariaDB, but again, third-party software, so it's not just the actual Debian software itself and the applications you get that, it's also the other third-party software that you could be running as well. You need to be fully aware of the potential issues you could be running into. Now, before you perform a major upgrade of an operating system, in other words, we're going to be going from Debian 12 to Debian 13, you want to make sure that all of the existing software that you're running is fully up to date for that specific version. Having said that, there is a slight twist here, and that Debian is saying that we need to make sure that we've got a kernel meta package installed. So jump over to my computer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run the command mentioned in those notes to actually check that. And as you can see, we're getting a line back saying that we've got a meta package installed, so we're good to go. In most cases, you should be fine. You should get something similar back in the output. If not, then you can go through these notes and they'll help you. Now, one thing I'm going to point out is that this is a remote session. So I've used SSH to get access to this computer I'm going to upgrade, and I need to be prepared for the fact that I could lose remote access to it. Now, for me, it's a virtual machine, and then that's running through hypervisor, so I can still get access to the console through the hypervisor. If this server goes offline, so maybe something breaks during the upgrade process, maybe something breaks after I reboot it, well, it's not going to affect the hypervisor, so I've still got remote access to hypervisor, which means I've still got remote access to this computer, no matter what. If it had been a remote site that this computer was on, I'd have to be prepared for the fact that I might lose access to the site, so I need a means to get into that site through another way. Maybe I need somebody on site who can provide that remote access and so on. These are all things you need to factor in, especially when you're doing major upgrades of computers. In any case, I'm good to go. So the first thing we're going to do to update this software, and we're still sticking with Debian 12 at this stage, we'll do sudo apt update to make sure that our package information is up to date. Next, what we'll do is a bit more aggressive of an upgrade here, and that we're going to be doing a full upgrade. Now, the reason it's more aggressive is that this can actually delete packages. So to give you an example, usually you would use apt upgrade. What that does is it goes through the process of upgrading your actual packages, but it won't necessarily delete packages. So for example, let's say you want to upgrade package A, but that requires package B to be deleted. Apt upgrade won't do that. It won't upgrade package A. This will. But we have to do this. We have to make sure that all of the software is up to date. So even this is a bit more aggressive, which is all the more reason why you want your backups of your software, of your data and so on, because you never know. Even at this stage, something might not go to plan. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit return there. And it's coming back and it's telling me we've got a new package to be installed. All of these ones will be upgraded. Fortunately, it's not telling me any are going to be removed. If it does and it lists them, you might want to pay attention to which ones. If you know your computer system well enough, you'll know if that's going to affect other things. But in this case, I am good to go. So I'm just going to say yes, and then off it goes and upgrades all of my software. Now, even at this stage, we're running into what's known as apt list changes. In other words, this is to give you feedback, actual packages that are being changed. This is actually telling me about an actual security change for this actual web server that I've got. Now, you're more likely to see this when you're doing a major upgrade, but in this case, what you can do is you can press the space bar and off it'll go, and it'll just go through all the lists, which usually isn't all that practical when you get to the full upgrade going from version 12 to version 13. In this case, there's just a bit of information. But yeah, you can press the space bar to just keep going through it and moving to the next page. Or what you can do is just press Q to quit, and then off it will go and carry on doing its upgrade. Now, one thing that Debian is recommending we do is to remove obsolete packages from the computer. So we're talking about software that's really just too old, it's no longer supported, it's deprecated, in which case it's better to remove it now. Reason being, apart from security risks and so on, is the fact that you might run into problems during the upgrade or after the upgrade, hence why they suggest taking it out now. Now, what we can do is to run this command, sudo apt list. Then in the quotes, we've got $obsolete. We use the quotes because we've got a special character there. Now, for me, it doesn't list anything, so that's it, I'm good to go. The only thing I'll point out is that, as an example, I had draw.io on another computer I was upgrading. That was flagged as obsolete, so I had to actually remove it. Now, I say remove it, they actually suggest you purge it. So that basically takes out not just the package, but ideally any configuration files that go with that package. So as an example, what you can do, rather than just purging individual packages, you can actually use that same filter, so sudo apt purge, and then we've got our $obsolete, and it'll take them out all in one go. The only trouble is I found sometimes that doesn't always work. Sometimes I have to run that a few times, in which case you'd purge the actual packages and then run that list option again just to make sure that they're gone. There is a bit of a catch here, I suppose, in that if the package is still needed, that's going to keep you held back from upgrading to Debian 13. But also, if you purge this from this computer now and then install a newer version, even if you've got a backup of the data and even if you've got a backup of the configuration file, you may not necessarily be able to restore that, because sometimes configurations, for example, change across versions and you have to upgrade them. So these are things you need to bear in mind if anything shows up in this list. Now, once you've gone through that process, what you want to check for is any configuration files that have been left behind by your packages. So we've got sudo apt list, and then we've got config files this time. Now, for me, that is coming back with this file here, so we want to remove that. So again, I mean, I could purge that on its own, or I can just use the filter if this had been multiple files. So I'll just hit return, say yes to remove that, and that removes that file. But as before, if there'd been multiple files here, you'd probably run the list option again, just to make sure all of those have actually been removed. Now, Debian also recommends that you actually remove non-Debian packages from your computer before you upgrade to Trixie. So we're talking about software that you've installed which hasn't come from the official Debian repositories. The reason being is that something could go wrong during the upgrade, or something could go wrong after the upgrade. So it's better to remove this type of software now. So what you can do is run this command. So we're doing sudo apt list, and this is our filter to look for non-Debian software. Now, for me, it isn't listing anything, but as Debian themselves say, bear in mind, this doesn't necessarily catch all software. So it helps to know what you've actually got installed on your computer. Typically, you would have installed it manually, pointed it to some third-party repository, and then installed it, or maybe you've downloaded a Debian compatible package from a third party. It really helps to know what you've actually installed, to know what you need to remove. Now, if there is any third-party software on your computer that needs to be removed, bear in mind that what you'll want to do is install a version that's compatible with Trixie on the upgraded actual computer. So it's going to be a case of, well, checking, is that software actually compatible? Is there a version available for Trixie? If not, well, you might want to hold back on the upgrade. In any case, like I say, nothing's been flagged here, but just to give you an example, I've got another computer that I upgraded and it's got the Brave web browser on it. So I had to remove that. So sudo apt purge, tell it to remove Brave browser. That actually comes with its own keyring. So sudo apt purge, and then there was Brave keyring, that would take it out. So I'm basically doing the reverse of the installation, and then that should remove the actual software. But do run that command again, just to be on the safe side, just to make sure it's not picking anything up. Although, like I said again, it's not 100% accurate. Now, once you've done that, what we can do is just check for some other things that should be removed part of this. So we're going to look for keyrings in /user/share/keyrings. Now for me, this is just flagging up a load of Debian ones, which is fine. If there'd been any third-party ones, it's better that you remove those now. One thing I'll point out is this is still referencing the old bullseye, and I found there's no point deleting these because they'll just come back anyway. So I'm not going to touch those. I'm going to leave these as is. Another thing to remove is any third-party repository files. So they tend to go into /etc/apt/sources.list.d. Now I'm not seeing any, but in the case of Brave, for example, I removed the actual list that came with that. So brave-browser-release.list. So check through that list to see what's there, and really you should just remove them all with the goal of just installing that software from scratch once you've actually upgraded to Debian 13. The reason being for doing that is that typically these files, they tend to reference the actual version of Debian, so that would probably be referencing Bookworm. I wouldn't want to be installing a Bookworm compatible version onto Trixie. But also, as you'll see later, we're going to be changing the actual format of our source lists anyway. So that's just something else to bear in mind. But anyway, we've gone through that process, and now we shouldn't have any third-party packages installed on this computer. Now, this is more of a tidy up than anything, but Debian recommend that you remove any configuration files that have been left behind. In other words, they really should be removed. So when packages are upgraded, you might find that a config file is backed up. When packages are removed, the actual configuration files might not actually be removed, and so on. And they give us a rather interesting find command to run to actually look for these. Now, in this case, it isn't coming back with anything because I don't really have much installed on this computer, to be fair, but to give you an example, on one computer, it gave me this. It told me about this file. And you can see it's basically, it's an actual backup copy of that file there. So since it's no longer needed, it'll be a case of actually removing it. So sudo remove, and then pointing to whatever these files actually get flagged. Now, you do want to be careful. So it's a case of do check whatever it's actually listing, just check that it is genuinely a file that's no longer needed. That one clearly was, I could easily tell, because I had one existing conf file, then I had another conf dpkg-old file. So I could tell from that that it was basically a backup copy done as during as part of like an upgrade process. But yeah, go through that list and that should tidy things up for you. Now when Bookworm came out, and in other words Debian 12, Debian started to be a bit more open to what's known as non-free firmware. That opened up access to drivers for more hardware, basically, that didn't have to necessarily come from Debian themselves. And that's become a bit more important, it seems, when it comes to Debian 13, because they do suggest you make sure your computer is ready to support non-free firmware. So what we can do is actually have a look at our sources list file. So I'll use cat to look at /etc/apt/sources.list. Now this is a fresh installation of Bookworm using a CD, and you can see it's already referencing non-free-firmware. If it had been upgraded from an earlier version to actual Bookworm, you might not see that. So it helps to put these sort of entries in now more than ever. Although, as I'll show later, we're going to be switching to a newer format anyway. But I just want to stress this as part of what their drive is towards this non-free firmware support. Now, we've got one line for the actual main software up here. We've got another one for security updates. Then we've got another one for just updates. But we've got these additional lines of deb-source. Now, these are actually for the actual source files. Now, unless you're actually compiling software yourself, there really is no need to have these. You may as well take these sort of lines out, and that would just leave you with essentially these 3 lines that I'm highlighting here. They're the only 3 that you'd really need. But again, I just want to draw your attention to this non-free firmware in case your computer isn't already supporting it. But what you're going to see later is we actually switch to a new format anyway. Now, we are almost there. We're almost ready to upgrade to Debian 13, just not quite. There's still a few more steps left. One of which is to actually carry out an audit of the packages. So we're going to do sudo dpkg-audit. So this is going to carry out a check for all packages. Hit return, and that's what we want. No output. If it does come back with something, then there's something wrong with one or more packages, and you're going to have to resolve that. But in my case, it's fine. So what we want to do now is to actually check the status of each individual package that we've got. So sudo dpkg-l, hit return, and then we've got this tedious process of checking line by line each package. Fortunately, it's quite easy. You just want to make sure that in the left-hand column here, you've got II for every line. So it's referring to the desired state and the current state of that package, and I means installed. So we want it to be installed, and it is installed. So what we've got is all of these lines. If anything stands out, it should pop up quite easily. It should be easily noticeable. So we should just be able to just keep pressing the space bar, keeping an eye on that left-hand column. And if anything is different, it should stand out quite easily. So I'm just pressing the space bar as we go along. There. So we've got to the end. It's flashed the screen. I didn't see anything that wasn't II, so I'm just going to press Q to quit. Now, for most deployments, I'd say that's probably what you'll get. I think it's probably niche situations, bespoke situations where that isn't what you see. So I'm talking about either in-house software development or third-party bespoke software where you've got somebody who's creating software and it's got specific needs, maybe a specific version of a package. If you upgrade that package, the application breaks. In those sort of situations, you'd actually keep the package on hold, and that's where we go to next, which is to actually check and see if anything is on hold. So sudo apt-mark show hold. For most deployments, you're not going to get anything in return because nothing's being kept at a specific version. The reason this is important is because if you've got an older version and it has to stay on that version, you're going to have problems. You have to make sure that all of the packages are on the latest version that they can be on this existing Debian 12 computer. You don't want anything on hold on some old version of software. If it is and you can't resolve it now, then hold off on the actual upgrade to Debian 13, otherwise you might have big problems and things break. Once you've resolved it, then you can actually take that software hold off. So what you could do is sudo apt-mark unhold and then the name of the actual package, for example. But like I say, that's pretty bespoke stuff. I mean, in my blog, I've covered things like apt pinning, proposed updates, and so on. I haven't really covered it in this video other than going over this concept of how software can be put on hold, just because to me it's more something that's going to be bespoke. Not many people have probably run into it anyway, but feel free to check out the blog if you're interested in knowing a bit more. So at this point, what we know is our software is in a fit state and it is on the latest version. Now at this stage, I'd be inclined to do some final tidy up work. So what we're going to do is to run sudo apt auto remove. So that's to remove any unneeded packages. So it's come back and told me it wants to remove that Linux image. So yep, that's fine by me. So I'll just wait for that to complete. So now that it's done that, we may as well clean up the actual package cache. So sudo apt clean. And then the last thing to do is to reboot this computer. Reason being is, well, Linux is pretty flexible, pretty tolerant. You can upgrade your packages on the fly more or less, and they'll be running the latest version. But it's usually better if you're actually running from a new boot up. But also, if the kernel gets upgraded, well, that doesn't take effect until you reboot the computer anyway. So in which case, we'll reboot this computer, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now, as part of this upgrade to Debian 13, it seems that Debian are quite keen for us to embrace the new APT Source Style. So what do I mean by that? Well, for most people, they'll be familiar with this file. So /etc/apt/sources.list. This lists the Debian repositories. And there's also a folder we can take a look at. So ls-l /etc/apt/sources.list.d. So this file here references the Debian repositories. If you want third-party repositories, you put files for them in this folder, but even that's now changing. So it's not just a change to the format that we're seeing here, but even the way this is handled. So I'll just clear the screen. Now, rather than just deleting the existing source list file, I'm going to move it. So basically, I'm just going to rename it. I'm going to give it a .bak extension to give me a backup. Then what I'm going to do is create a completely new file, specifically to cover this new style. So this one's called debian.sources, and it's going into the /etc/apt/sources.list.d folder. So just to give you some perspective, that's what we're normally used to. This is going to be the new format. So this has been around for some time, so that's why we can actually use it in Bookworm. But yeah, it's in some respects it's a bit cleaner and tidier to look at compared to here. It's basically combining all three of these lines into two blocks, if you will. So we've got the actual suite here, and so instead of having Bookworm and Bookworm-updates, we've now got Trixie and Trixie-updates. So it's combining those two lines into one. Security is still running as a separate block. Reason being is they've got a different URI to point to. I think it helps to have a look and see what your existing setup looks like to give you some comparisons, because you start off with the types, which is deb, as you see here. I haven't brought across deb-source because I don't need source code, so I'm going to leave that out. We want a URI, so in this case deb.debian.org/Debian. Bear in mind, instead of the usual HTTP, we've now got HTTPS. So I think it was some time ago that Debian switched over to supporting TLS, but now it's pretty much standard. Now, we've already got an actual key to actually validate files that are downloaded, but now we're going to move over to this style where we really are going to be using HTTPS. I mean, you could have done it within the old style, but in the new style, it's expected basically to use HTTPS. So now you're getting that extra protection from TLS, the initial handshake to check that the server is what it says it is. You're also getting some encryption in here as well. So I quite like that they've done that. And then what we've got is our suites. So again, so Trixie and Trixie dash updates, because what I'm doing now is getting ready to upgrade to Trixie as opposed to staying on Bookworm. So that's, again, those two lines there. We want main and non-free-firmware. But if you've got other suites that you use, you'll have to put them in there. Then we've got it signed by. So this time we are actually specifically pointing to where the actual key ring is for these. Now you could have included that on that line as well. There is a way to do that. But now it's expected. So we're using /user/share/keyrings. That's where we're expecting keyrings to go to. And again, we've got two blocks, one for the main software and one for the security. And that's, again, just because the URL will be different, or URI, depending on how you want to reference that. So what I'm going to do is just take these lines out because I just wanted those as a reference file. So now that is the new style, deb822-style as it's known now. So I'll save that. Just clear my screen because now we're ready to upgrade to Debian 13. So now we're finally ready to upgrade from Debian 12 to Debian 13, but we're going to do this in stages. So first thing we're going to do is to run sudo apt update. So we did upgrade to the newer APT Source Style, and we've told the computer about Trixie. The only trouble is we need to update the actual package information as well. So that's why we're doing sudo apt update first. So off it goes, gets us information, and it's coming back to say, oh wow, even on this basic installation, there's 301 packages need to be upgraded. Okay, it's not something to be aware of. Right, now then, what we can do is actually also check if we've got enough disk space. Now the way Debian have pitched this in their example is we'll run sudo apt full-upgrade, but we've got this condition of trivial only, which guarantees it's going to fail because basically a full upgrade is anything but trivial. So we'll hit return and it goes through the normal process, but then it bombs out. It's deliberately kicked me out. I don't even get a choice in the prompt of do you want to proceed or not. It's no, this is anything but trivial. It's not happening. But the key point is if you look down towards the end, it should warn you if you don't have enough disk space. Now, if you do run into that problem, you're going to have to start freeing up disk space. And Debian do give you some pointers on their website how you can do that. The good thing about virtual machines is you can always resize the disk, for example. But in any case, we can carry on. So what we're now going to do is an actual minimal upgrade first. So sudo apt upgrade -- without new packages. Hit return. I'll say yes to carry on. Although notice it's saying there's 212 will be upgraded, but 89 will not be. So we'll carry on. So it's got to download, start unpacking this sort of thing, but there's going to be interruptions along the way. And what you get is going to differ to me. It really depends on what you've got installed. So we're just going to wait until the changelogs here finishes because it is going to interrupt here with apt list changes. Now, you probably do want to go through these and press space and read through them because some of them are going to be significant changes. Maybe there's like new features introduced, certain features are deprecated and so on. So you really want to check through these and go through all of them really just to be on the safe side. Now at this stage, I don't have hardly anything installed, so I've got to the end and I can just press Q to quit now. And then off it then goes and starts the update or upgrade to Trixie. Now there's going to be at least one interruption here because what it's going to ask for is if we want to automate the service restarts basically. And for me that's perfectly fine. I don't want to have to keep answering a prompt every single time a service needs restarting. So I'm going to switch over to yes, hit return, and then off it goes. Now, while it goes through the upgrade process, again, it's going to vary depending on what you've got installed because if a configuration file has been modified in particular, then you might get a new version of that config file that it wants to install, and it's going to have to ask you, well, look, I want to install this config file, but the existing one's different. Now, do you want to keep that existing one, or do you want the new one? Now, it really depends, entirely up to you, but what I would suggest is to go with the new one. Reason being is there might be features deprecated, there might be new features come in. Now, I run into that quite often with cronny, for example. Whereas the SSHD service, for example, it has a configuration file, but you can have overrides with it. Cronny allows you to do that, but the trouble is they are overrides that we're introducing. It doesn't deal with the actual default pointer to the actual pools that are used for NTP servers. I don't use those. So when it comes to cronny, I have to change the main config file. So whenever I do a new upgrade of a computer, I always get challenged, do you want to keep the config file for cronny, for example? So what I would suggest is, if you've actually got services where you're making alterations to the main config file, try and do the overrides. Just introduce a new file into the .d folder, and it'll make your life so much simpler. Because, yeah, every time you do an upgrade, the main config file changes. It'll always be up to date. It'll have the new features. The deprecated ones will be removed, but your overrides will still take effect, assuming that they're still supported. But in any case, this is just step one, if you will, which is the first upgrade. So we'll just wait for this to play out. Well, the first stage of the upgrade is now completed. I didn't get any more prompts and hasn't been reporting any errors. So now we're going to move on to the actual full upgrade. So just clear the screen here. And this time we're going to do sudo apt full upgrade. Now this time it's going to say we've got 89 upgraded, 61 newly installed, 23 to remove. So this is something to bear in mind. As part of that minimal upgrade, it doesn't even remove files. It's a lot more safer, but it doesn't get you up to everything being up to date with Debian 13. So that's why we've got to do this as a second stage, if you will. So we'll say yes to continue. Even though we've done that first upgrade, we're still going to get interrupted as we go along with this version of the upgrade as well. So again, it really varies depending on your setup. It depends on what software that you've got installed. Again, you're going to run into these situations of config files are different. You're going to get prompts of, well, do you want to change them? Do you want to keep them? And so on. So we'll just wait until we're finished with our change logs here, because it's more or less the same as what we went through before. So again, we've got our apt list changes. So I'm just going to quit this time. Then it's going to go off and start actually unpacking the software. Either way, it's still going to take a while. So even if you've actually gone through this process of a sort of a minimal upgrade, if you will, this one also takes quite a while. And again, really varies depending on what you've got installed. Well, this full upgrade has actually now finally finished. I didn't get any critical errors being raised. I did get warnings. Typically, it's a case of it wanted to delete a folder, but it wasn't empty. I did get some interesting feedback where it was saying there's a dependency, but it was going to get deleted anyway because we said we wanted it to be deleted. And when you do a full upgrade, that is the situation. You're basically saying yes, it's okay to remove packages. I think there's a clever way of going about this, of removing packages and installing new ones. So I think it does go into quite a bit of thought, and that's probably why this one actually took so long to do, because it's not just upgrading packages, it's removing packages, it's looking for newer versions of those packages or even complete replacements of those packages, working out what new dependencies are needed and so on. So it does take quite a while. So we had that initial upgrade that had a lot of packages to upgrade. Then we had this second stage where there didn't seem to be that many, but there was still a lot more work to be done. Now, in my case, I didn't get any more interruptions, but you might, in your case, again, it depends if you've got config files that need replacing. It really depends on what's left to be upgraded and so on. But final test now is to reboot the computer and, well, see if it still works. Well, now that this computer is back up and running, first thing I want to do is to, well, as you can see, check to make sure that it's working. So this is just a basic web server, and I'm getting the actual default web page, so I know that that's working. So that's a good thing, because really that's all that it is. It's just a web server, and I can still SSH into it and so on. So what we're going to do now is a tidy up. So I'll do sudo apt auto remove. That's my password. So there might be quite a few to remove here. So 29 packages. What's interesting is they've changed this now. So although you're seeing this in red, it's just to tell you that these are files to be removed. It's not like a problem as such. Typically, like red to me would mean there's a problem, but in this case, it's flagging things to remove in red. I think it's when it's things to install, I think it gives them in green. But yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll remove those files. So this goes back to when we're doing this full upgrade. It's installing new packages because of new dependencies and so on. So even though there's still quite a bit of work going on in that part of the process, there's still leftovers, and that's why I'm doing this tidy up. It's interesting, they've kind of changed this like progress bar a bit as well. So I quite like that. But as usual, we've still got a percentage there. So we've just got to sit and twiddle our thumbs more or less, waiting for it to remove those. But what I'll also do, once that's finished, is to clean the actual package cache as well. So just wait for that to complete. It's almost there. So then we'll do sudo apt clean. So that's done that. Now, as before, when we were just doing a complete upgrade of Debian 12 itself to get everything updated there, what I'm also going to check for is anything that's considered to be obsolete. So sudo apt, and then our obsolete option to see if there's anything here that's no longer. So there's quite a few packages in here where it's saying, well, these are obsolete now. So in that case, what I'm going to do is tell it to purge those. So sudo apt purge this time. Again, it's saying we're going to remove these. So yeah, I didn't have to put why. It's going to do that automatically anyway. So it's fixing a few things as it goes along. We're getting there. And then I'll just check one last time, because like I was saying before, just running that doesn't guarantee that it's actually going to remove all of those files. So it's worth checking again. So it doesn't come back with anything this time. So that's removed obsolete ones. So now I'm going to check for any configuration files left behind. So sudo apt list. This time we're looking for anything flagged as a config file. So now it's flagged those. So I'll take those out using sudo apt purge. So sudo apt purge, same filter of config-files. Yes, we'll carry on with that. So this is all basically because of that full upgrade process where it'll be swapping packages in and out, well, because of these dependencies as it's going along. So although there's like a lot of thought, it might, I mean, I'm assuming it's basically, it'll have had to install some things, but it had to wait for the newer versions to then get used, by which time they couldn't actually then remove them. So you've got these things left behind. But whatever the reason, I just want to double check now. Okay, so it's not flagging any of those left. So that's good. And then again, I'm also going to check for config files, because this is a major upgrade. So it'll be interesting to see if this comes up with anything. I missed the comma off at the end, or the code, if you will. Right, so like I said before, I'd flagged this up before in a previous example when I was trying to get Debian 12 up to date. So if we have a look for that, you can see there's /etc. So ls-l/etc. I mean, I could have filtered that better, I suppose, but you can see there's a ca-certificates.conf. So that's the actual config file. That'll be a backup version of it. So I'm quite happy to remove that actual config file, really. Don't see a need to actually keep it. So we shall remove that. Sudo remove, paste that in. So that takes that out. Then I'll just double check that we haven't got anything left. We shouldn't have because I removed it. Yeah, so it's not flagging anything up now. So this is now actually running on Debian 13, or at least it should be. So cat/etc/Debian_version. Yeah, so we're on 13.1, which at the time of recording is the latest stable release. So we've now actually upgraded this computer from Debian 12, aka Bookworm, to Debian 13, aka Trixie. Now, in an ideal world, a fresh installation of an operating system would be preferred, but that usually only happens when it's time to replace the hardware, so it's more common to upgrade operating systems. As you'll have seen, there are quite a few steps to go through when upgrading to Debian 13, but it's all to try and make the process as smooth as possible. And although Debian 12 will still be supported for quite some time, an upgrade is necessary if you want newer features and improved performance. But what Linux operating systems do you use, and what's your experience upgrading them? Let me know in the comments below.